Okay, welcome everybody to our Constitution Day event today. I am Professor Leslie Keel. I teach history here at Porterville College, and I am the coordinator of our Chap program. The Porterville College Cultural and Historical Awareness Program was organized in 2002 to enhance students' awareness of certain important aspects of our society to which they may previously have had little to no exposure. A theme is chosen by Chap members each school year, and faculty members across the campus are encouraged to integrate elements of that theme into their coursework. By subtly saturating students with information about the chosen topic throughout the year, the awareness of the entire campus and community is elevated. Our theme for the next 2 years, fall 2024 to spring 2026, was voted on by over 200 students last year. That theme is Don't Stop Believing, all things belief systems, spirituality, religion, and secular humanism. We will be exploring the different ways humans have answered and wrestled with the big questions. Who are we? Why are we here? I hope you will join us at upcoming Chap events, including our event next Thursday, held here in the theater at 11:30 a.m. We will be exploring Tule River Yokut spirituality and practice. We will be hearing from a panel including medicine man and spiritual leader Leonard Manuel Jr., tribal council member and spiritual leader Heather Tarrin, and PC alumni Vanessa Manuel. We are excited to be partnered with the Native American Club to bring this event to our campus and hope to see you all there. I want to quickly thank our maintenance staff, technicians, Chap Committee, Roger Perez, Davey Rodriguez, and President Monterez for all their work and support in making these events possible. Special thanks to James Thompson for graciously moving his class so we could be in the theater today. Today's event is in honor of Constitution Day. This year we are excited to be hearing from Darlene Haines on the topic of reproductive rights and constitutional privacy, the future of women's health after Dobbs. Professor Haines is an adjunct faculty member and part-time lecturer teaching American government and politics at several community colleges and universities across California, including Fresno State and California State University, Bakersfield. With over a decade of experience, she specializes in both American and California government and politics, as well as dual enrollment programs, helping high school students get a head start on college-level coursework. She has been teaching online for over 7 years, making political science accessible to a wide range of students. She holds a master's in public administration from Fresno State and is currently pursuing a master's degree in political psychology from Arizona State University. A few disclaimers before her presentation. The views and opinions expressed in this presentation are those of the speaker and do not necessarily reflect the views of Porterville College or its affiliates. This presentation is for educational purposes only and should not be considered legal advice. For specific legal questions or concerns, please consult a qualified attorney. All materials used in this presentation are for educational purposes under the Fair Use Doctrine. Any redistribution or use of content outside this presentation requires appropriate citation or permission. Finally, the information presented is accurate as of the date of this presentation. Legal cases and rulings may change, so please verify with current sources for the latest updates. At the end of Professor Haines' presentation, we will open up for a few questions and end at 12:30. Once the event is over, I will have proof of attendance cards for those who need it. And with that, please give a warm welcome to Professor Darlene Haines.
Good morning. Can everybody hear me okay? Good. Do I have any former or current students in here? Oh, well, welcome. It's good to see you face to face. So, well, it is definitely an honor to be here today, to be able to talk to you about privacy and the Constitution. The Constitution is absolutely fascinating to me. I never mentioned that over a decade of teaching, never get tired of thinking about the fact that this document was written over 235 years ago and is still the same much meaning that they had back then drafting this document as we do today. So I want to go ahead and get started talking about privacy. As you know, the Constitution, the U.S. Constitution, is the cornerstone of our democratic values and individual freedoms today. So I will be discussing how that relates to one of our most deeply personal and legally contentious issues, which is the right to privacy and reproductive rights, particularly in the context of abortion. One thing that might surprise some of you is the word privacy is not explicitly mentioned in the Constitution. Nowhere in the document will you find the word privacy. Over the years, however, the courts have inferred a right to privacy from several amendments, and this inferred right has been central to landmark decisions like Roe versus Wade, and more recently, Dobbs versus Jackson's Women's Health Organization. Our discussion today will explore how the courts have developed this concept of privacy, its constitutional foundations, and the far-reaching implications of the Dobbs decision for both reproductive rights and the future of constitutional privacy. To understand the current debate around privacy and abortion, it's important to first recognize how privacy has been interpreted within the framework of the Constitution. As I mentioned earlier, the Constitution does not explicitly grant a right to privacy, but the Supreme Court has inferred this right through the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment. In 1965, the case Griswold versus Connecticut was a pivotal moment in this interpretation. The court struck down a law banning the use of contraceptives, asserting that the Constitution protects certain zones of privacy, particularly in the matters of personal and family life. From this case, the idea of privacy as a fundamental liberty took root, setting the stage for future rulings related to reproductive rights. The Due Process Clause became the vehicle through which courts would protect this deeply personal liberty, even though it's not explicitly stated in the text. This inferred right to privacy became central to cases like Roe versus Wade, where courts found that a woman's decision to terminate a pregnancy was protected by this right to privacy. However, justices like Antonin Scalia criticized this interpretation, arguing that the Constitution should be read literally and that the right to privacy lacks textual support. This difference in constitutional interpretation lies at the heart of the current debate surrounding reproductive rights and other issues involving personal autonomy. In 1973, the Supreme Court decided Roe versus Wade, which significantly expanded the right to privacy by ruling that a woman's decision to have an abortion fell under this inferred right. This landmark case balanced the individual's privacy with the state's interest in protecting potential life, allowing abortions to be legal until fetal viability, which is also highly controversial. This decision reinforced the notion that personal medical decisions, including the choice to terminate a pregnancy, were protected by the Constitution's inferred right to privacy. But Roe was not just about abortion. It was a reaffirmation of the principle that there are limits to the government's role in regulating deeply personal decisions. It's here that we see the balance between individual freedom and government oversight, a balance that the courts have wrestled with for decades. Fast forward nearly 50 years to the Dobbs versus Jackson's Women's Health Organization decision in 2022. This ruling overturned Roe versus Wade, asserting that the Constitution does not confer a right to abortion and returning the issues to the states. This marked a seismic shift in how privacy is interpreted in the realm of reproductive rights. States now have the power to either protect or restrict access to abortion as they see fit, creating a patchwork of laws across the nation. But Dobbs doesn't just impact abortion. It has implications for other privacy-related issues, such as reproductive technologies like IVF or in vitro fertilization, and access to contraception. If states can define life as beginning at conception, how might that affect unused embryos from IVF treatments? Will other privacy-based rulings, such as those regarding same-sex marriage, be challenged in the future? These are all questions that stem from the reasoning used in the Dobbs decision. The legal battle continues. Several cases challenging new state abortion laws are making their way through lower courts. The outcomes of these cases will shape the future of privacy and reproductive rights in America for years to come. Additionally, with the rise of digital surveillance, there are growing concerns about how personal medical information, including data from period tracking apps, could be used against women in states with restrictive abortion laws. We are standing at a crossroads where privacy as we know it is being redefined, not just in the context of reproductive rights, but in how we understand individual freedoms in an increasingly interconnected and monitored world. As we look ahead, the political landscape will play a critical role in determining the future of reproductive rights and privacy in America. Vice President Kamala Harris has been an outspoken advocate for reinstating the protections of Roe v. Wade through federal legislation. Excuse me. During the recent presidential debate, Harris pledged to sign legislation that would codify Roe if elected president. She has also been highly critical of the state-level abortion bans that followed the Dobbs decision, sharing personal stories of women affected by these restrictive rights. Former President Donald Trump, on the other hand, played a crucial role in the Dobbs decision by appointing 3 of the Supreme Court justices who voted to overturn Roe. Trump continues to support returning the issue of abortion to the states and falsely claims that legal scholars and the public supported overturning Roe. He has also promoted misleading statements about the Democratic stance on abortion, which Harris swiftly corrected during the debate. As we celebrate Constitution Day, we must remember that the Constitution is not just a static document. It is a living framework designed to protect our fundamental freedoms while adapting to the needs of changing society. The inferred right to privacy, although not explicitly mentioned in the Constitution, has been one of the most critical developments in constitutional law, shaping our understanding of personal autonomy in cases like Griswold, Roe, and now Dobbs. But the Constitution is also a document that demands our engagement. The decisions made by the courts, the interpretations of its text, and the laws passed by our representatives all influence how our rights are defined and protected. As we look to the future, the question before us is not just about reproductive rights, but about the very nature of privacy and individual freedom in a democratic society. The framers of the Constitution left us with a legacy that balances governmental power with individual liberty, and it is our responsibility to ensure that this balance is maintained. As citizens and voters, we must stay informed and actively participate in the democratic process because the future of privacy and personal freedoms, whether related to reproductive health, digital privacy, or beyond, will be shaped by the choices we make at the ballot box and in our communities. I encourage you to continue reflecting on the vital role the Constitution plays in protecting our most cherished rights. Thank you. I'll go ahead and take any questions.
Yeah, if you have questions, you can raise your hand. We'll pass the mic around. Okay, back here.
Okay. Hello, my name is Jordan Herrera. I had a question because I think this topic is very divisive, but when you talk to people more about it and get their real opinion on it, there's a lot more nuance to it. Why don't we see that in our actual politics? When policy is being made, why isn't there why do you feel like the overturning has to be of Roe v. Wade or something like that? Has to be such a, like you said, it overturn a lot of things that not everybody fully agreed on.
That's a great question. And I think that what you're looking for is like, maybe goes back to the root of this argument. And it goes all the way back to the creation of the US Constitution and the argument over power and individual liberties and individual freedoms. The discussions between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. Should the government have an extensive amount of power? How much power should the government have? Where does that line can it be drawn in terms of protection for individual liberties and freedoms? And a lot of the Anti-Federalists, they wanted a limited federal government. They wanted the states to have more power and more say over the citizens that live in those states. And that's what we see today in the Dobbs decision. And Donald Trump has, in different media formats, expressed that he feels that the states should be the one to make that decision. However, Kamala Harris feels differently. And as I mentioned, she wants to make abortion specifically, but I think in terms of a larger extent privacy, a federal issue. So the main root of this comes from the argument over this idea of governmental power and how much power should the government have over determining what we as citizens can be allowed to do. And it is, like I said in the beginning, it's very fascinating to me. 235 years ago was a long time ago. And that's, we're talking the late 1700s. There's no internet, there's no cell phones, technology has increased and expanded so much over these years, and yet those same sentiments we hold very dear. And that is the sentiment that we don't want the government, I think for most people, we don't want the government to interfere in our personal decisions and our personal lives and the decisions that we make for our family. And so personally speaking, I don't think that I would ever choose to have an abortion, but it's a personal story. I had a son when I was 18, and the father didn't want to have anything to do with it, and I was adamant that I was not going to have an abortion. So I made the decision at 18 to have this child. Dropped out of high school. I did not complete my senior year. I didn't go to my senior prom. I didn't walk across the stage and get a diploma and shake a hand. When I graduated high school, it was through a GED. And it was very difficult. And I don't think that I would change that decision, but I know that the option was there for me at that time. And then, well, she's going to be 4 at the end of September, but when I was 45, I thought I was going through early menopause, and turns out I was pregnant. So I had my own grandchild. I feel like. I was concerned because, as you get older in life and have pregnancies later on in life, there's an increased chance of Down syndrome and other types of medical problems that can happen. And I had to contemplate. Now, this was 2020, so this was before the Dobbs decision, and I really had to think about, do I want to bring a child into this world and that might need assistance for the rest of their life when, I'm going to be applying for Social Security at her high school graduation. So, it was a main concern for me, and I cannot imagine being in that situation and possibly having to face, that I might need to, that I might want to terminate a pregnancy and not being able to do that because the government is restricting that. California, I didn't mention California specifically in my speech, but as you know, California quickly after the Dobbs decision decided to enshrine the right to a constitution the right to an abortion within our Constitution. That is something that is a trademark, a hallmark of California, right? To be allowing a lot of personal liberties in terms of how you want to live your life. And this is in contrast to a lot of the states in the Midwestern United States, Alabama and Tennessee and Arkansas, where women who may be in a situation that I was in would not be able to seek an abortion if it was necessary, that they would have to travel to another state. Now, California has, Gavin Newsom specifically, has opened up that invitation and actually offered women in those states in that situation to pay for travel and possibly hotel or possibly procedure to come to California to have an abortion. We're living in a lot of different times, and I did mention a little bit about technology in terms of privacy, and I don't know how many of you women use tracking apps to track your cycles. I do, because I can't remember what I did yesterday. So sometimes the doctor will ask, when was your last cycle? I don't know. I have to look at my app. And there's concerns about privacy with that. Can the government look up our information, and could that be used against women in terms of what they want to do with their bodies in terms of reproductive rights and other things? That question is still remains to be seen. A side note from this, you guys might have heard the other day that there was another attempt on Donald Trump's life. They caught the guy because somebody had taken a picture of the license plate, the vehicle and the license plate that man fled in. And the way that they caught him was that Florida has license plate readers. And I started thinking about that. Is that an invasion of your privacy? Like, you can't even go anywhere without the government knowing, where you are, where you've been. California also, I don't know if they've done it yet, but they're going to put speed, radar cameras on certain freeways just around, and you don't get. So, I drive to Bakersfield twice a week, and I usually drive with my maps because it'll tell me with traffic and everything. And when I get off on Ming Avenue and it tells me, red light camera ahead, because it knows and it's warning me. Hey, don't think about running this red light because the government will get you. They don't get those warnings though for the ones on the freeways. So, we have this balance that sometimes doesn't lean towards the way that we want it to lean in terms of privacy. And the real question is, and I don't know if I've answered your question, I know I've taken a long way around, but the real question is in this presentation, and what we should think about when we go to the ballot box in just under 50 days now, how much government do we want involved in our lives? Where do we want to draw that line? Where do we want to limit government? Because that's what our Bill of Rights, it's not correctly named. It should be a list of liberties. Because it lists our liberties, our freedoms from government. And while privacy is not one of those listed, it has been inferred through the courts over the years to this idea that individuals should have a right to privacy. How much government do you want in your life? Yes?
Hi. I don't know if I need this microphone. I do? Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Melissa Black in the English department, and as I'm listening, I just was going to ask, could you clarify for the audience, when we're talking about government's intervention in our lives, there's state level government, then federal level government, if you live in a liberal state like California, which is what you were just talking about, then we have certain rights built in that were we to move across state lines, we may lose. So could you comment a bit on the benefits of federal legislation?
Sure, that's a great question, and that is a great point, and one that I did skip. This idea of federalism has also been contentious throughout the creation of, since the Constitution and during the creation of the Constitution. It was the main argument between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, and also it does make a difference right now under the Dobbs decision where the states get to decide, individual states get to decide what abortion looks like, how that's defined within that state. You living in California, if you do choose to move to another state like maybe Alabama or Tennessee, they're going to have more restrictive rights on abortion. A federal ban or federal legislation would mean that it would apply to all of the states. So states can still make a law or a ruling, but they could not supersede the national government or the federal government's laws and policies. So when you hear this discussion, or when you watch debates about when the question is asked about abortion or about privacy, Donald Trump is always saying, I think that the states should decide that. Right? In other words, he's saying, I don't want federal legislation concerning abortion. And he will not, and the moderators will press him, he will not say, when he's asked, will you sign into law a federal, something about abortion? Right, like a federal right to abortion. Will you sign that into law? He won't answer that. He will ask the question: will you veto something that comes across if it looks like a federal right to privacy or to abortion? He will not say yes or no whether he will veto it or not. All he says is, I think that that's something that should be left up to the states. So without actually explicitly coming out and saying that he would veto a federal right to an abortion, he would. He is saying that. Kamala Harris, on the other hand, is on the other side of that, and she's saying that that she would probably encourage Congress to write legislation that would allow a federal, like what we had with Roe versus Wade. Does that answer the question, or did that?
Yes, I think so. I think it's important for us to note, historically speaking, when there's been federal legislation that has greatly improved the country. People hear federal legislation and think it's more powerful or more invasive than state legislation. And would you like to comment?
Yeah, generally speaking, the closer that you are to government, the more invasive it's going to be. If you think about local government, and they're going to regulate, the roads, like traffic safety. Say it again.
How often I water my lawn?
How often you water your lawn? Absolutely. Can you walk your dog without a leash? No, usually they do. But you have a lot of laws that govern your everyday life, and as you increase out into state government and federal government, it is not as it's not as I don't want to use the word invasive, but it's not as controlling in your everyday life as in local government. But federal legislation that would allow abortion rights seems to be something that is, because it's such a personal decision, it seems to be something that's invasive.
And just personal opinion, I believe the reason this controversy is so heated because
it's so heated because it's not just about rights, but because there is so many people that look upon abortion as immoral, and they are tasking the government to be the moral police. And I think that's why it's so heated. Like you said, you chose not to, and what we decide morally, we're getting confused. We're confusing our lines between our morality and our civic life. And I believe that's why this is so heated. A lot of people are hearing this and going, oh, this is about privacy rights? I thought it was because abortion was wrong. Because people in my generation, that's kind of what they're looking at, but they're kind of like wanting to task the government, okay, they can't do that because it's wrong. And then other people are just, and every situation is different. But that's what makes this, I believe, this controversy so heated. That
Yes.
some people are coming at it from that perspective instead of the perspective of, this is my right.
That's correct. There is a religious component as well, and a moral component as well to this. But keep in mind, with this being Constitution Day that we're celebrating, this division may not have been about abortion, but it was about other things, right? But it was still the same idea, right? As I mentioned, how much power do you want the government in your life? Go ahead.
So we've been talking a lot this morning about the constitutional right of the women and their privacy. What is the ongoing discussion about the constitutional right of the unborn child? That is ultimately what we were discussing when we discuss abortion. Is there any kind of conversation around potentially changing or specifying something like that? I know there's talk about gestational age and viability and things like that. And is that maybe a different perspective or a different way of approaching some of these laws and changes being made is a conversation around the child's constitutional rights?
Yeah, that's a great question and a great aspect to this. I have not heard a lot about that. The only thing that I recall hearing about, and this was probably around the Dobbs decision coming down to 2022, was criticism on the pro-life group that they're not considering the child. That they're only considering the child in terms of not aborting it. They're not considering the money that it costs to raise that child and to, for housing and food and things like that. So I have not heard anything, I think the main issue is trying to be refocused, at least on Kamala Harris's side of the debate, is looking more broadly at privacy and not just specifically on abortion, although she does have to address that as well. But it's more about a woman's right to choose, and not just a woman, but a family, and men are involved as well. We're not frogs, spontaneously, have offspring. So, men are involved in this conversation as well. And it's not just, typically I think that a lot of people, when they hear the topic of abortion, they think of the single young, 18 to 24 that had a oopsie and is, looking to use that as a way to, use it as birth control. That there's not as many of those cases as it is married couples who already have children and are pregnant with a second or third or fourth child, and there's something that happens that threatens the mother's life or threatens the life of the child, or that child would not have a good quality of life determined through medical tests and things like that. It's heartbreaking for a lot of these families. And I think that this is just me personally, but I think that if it was left to the states, that you're gonna have a lot of people in those states that are going to feel that government, state government is being more intrusive in their lives than if we would have a federal ban. And so
intrusive in their lives, but potentially protecting the life of the unborn child who could potentially have constitutional.
potentially, but I haven't heard anything about that.
So my question is, what definition of privacy were the courts working under in Roe v. Wade versus the Dobbs decision?
So both of those decisions, they were looking at the Griswold versus Connecticut case and looking at how that abortion or contraception or any decisions made around family planning should be a private matter and not the matter of the courts, or not a matter of the government. So they were looking at privacy in terms of in that case was about the state had banned contraception. So that case was about looking at that, and that the federal government or the state government should not be allowed to be that intrusive in personal matters.
So as I look at this particular issue, one of the reasons it seems that we can't come to consensus is that we can't come to a consensus as to what the question is. We had an example of two different approaches to the question over on this side of the room. There really are two questions. Right? There are two individuals, there are two questions. And if we frame it, that the question is, does or should an adult have the right to determine their own life and their own reproductive choices even, or their own health care? Well, if that's the only question, duh. We don't have anything to debate. Of course they do it. If the question is, does a child have the right to be protected and life, and that's the only question, then duh, the answer is obvious. So where we wrestle is just the question, and maybe it's both. When do we define, or when do we conceive of the idea that fertilized egg becomes a person? And we don't seem to have consensus on that. We're wrestling with those things all the time, which is why this is an issue that never seems to go away. Or at least that's the way I understand it. Why it never goes away. I don't know how we get to an answer.
I don't. I'm not a scientist in terms of like being in the lab and biology and all of that. It was mentioned in the introduction that I am currently pursuing a degree in political psychology through Arizona State, and in one of the classes we explored. Can researchers define a gene that makes people either Democrat or Republican or conservative or liberal, or and it's not possible, right? Can we define when a life becomes a life? When does it become life? When does it become a person? And I don't think that argument is going to go away. Personally speaking, and I think if you ask individuals, like, you're gonna have a lot of different answers. For myself, I believe that it's when the sperm and the egg meet. That's me. But there's a lot of people that might have different opinions about that, and because of that makes it very difficult to allow people to decide what the government's role should be in that.
Over here.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to, kind of Dr. Keel's conversation. I'm a nurse, and as a nurse, I understand abortion, late-term abortion, very late-term. I do understand medical problems of moms who put their life at risk, also violent conceptions, and the responsibilities, because once you bring a child into this world, you need to care for it. And when a child is neglected, abused, and not well cared for, we have another dysfunctional human being on this planet, potentially causing more harm, or at least needing a lot of help to reach a quality of life. So when you force people to bring life into this world, it has consequences. Also, abortions, when the Constitution was written, abortions took place, just not in a medical facility. And looking at other countries in the world, that they don't offer these services, or so abortions take place every day. So that's not even in question. It's the quality of an abortion they would provide and a safety. And once you equalize the states, or give the federal government power, or the state, I think the only power on this question should be between a woman conceiving and the healthcare provider advising her. And then I think where we're totally dropping the ball as a society is, this is 2024, education, internet, information. It does not have to come to conception. There are preventative measures that can be taken, and ultimately there's only one measure that prevents conception, but there's some with 90+% possibilities. So, maybe we're having partially the wrong approach to this and looking at the perspective that we're creating, or we want a government to create for us. So that's just some thought from my perspective. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I happen to completely agree with you. I think the only way that we are going to get some sort of definitive answer, maybe some sort of, I don't know if there could be a compromise in this issue, but that it is that the focus of the argument. Am I still on? The focus of the argument needs to be redirected to caring for, if you force someone to carry a child and birth it, what then, right? How do you, what happens then?
If you have a crystal ball that predicts that child is going to have a terrible life, or that they are going to commit crimes, or that they are going to be tortured, or they are going to be, you have no guarantee that is going to potentially happen for that child. And so you are ultimately making that decision for that child of what their life is going to be.
Yes.
So we all, by the Constitution, by the we have individual rights that give us, freedoms and this ability to live in this country to be whatever we want to be, however we want to be. I mean, that's the beauty of living in America. And so you're denying that child that very option possibility.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was getting to when I said that I had to personally make that decision when I was 45. That I don't, I wanted to be responsible enough to be able to look at, is there something that needs to be done to make sure that this child has a viable life.
I'm going to take a moderator's prerogative and pivot this a little bit back to privacy. Because I think we're also ignoring the fact that there's an inherent question of hypocrisy. Because you have one side of the argument that is very much pro-abortion and allowing a woman's right to choose, who are often on the same side of forcing things like vaccines or registering guns. So how do we deal with that innate, whatever side of this particular issue you are on, hypocrisy of when is it privacy and when is it public safety?
That's a great question, because it is true. And this is the same, again, it's the same argument that goes back to when the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists were trying to decide in terms of their lives, what is the role of government? And it is interesting and a little bit hypocritical, because in making policy, you are essentially intruding in people's lives, telling them what they can or can't do. And so this is where we start to look at different ideology, where ideology comes from, and we know that it comes from our political, what we call political socialization, our upbringing, right? Who our parents were, where we went to school, did we go to church or not? And all of these things and beliefs that are developed as we grow up, and then in turn going and voting and making policy in that way is very difficult to ascertain, like the idea that the same person who wants the government to stay out of their lives in terms of making decisions for family matters and family planning is the same person who wants the government to intrude in everyone's life to force them to vaccinate, for example. So we have a broad mix of all of this. More recently, you may have heard of, and we've seen this polarization that is happening in government, where you have a lot of people who, I believe that this is a result of our faster communication nowadays. I mean, if you think about, like, if you wanted to form a group of people that is going to support a particular cause back in, 1805, you're gonna have to get your horses and your buggies and go out door to door. The printing press, and a lot of people are surprised, 1452, 1456, somewhere around there. So, I mean, you could still print things and put it, there were newspapers and things like that, but it took a long time. And it was a lot more difficult to get people to join together, to get a large enough group of people to join together to make a difference in changing policy to what you want. Today, I mean, if you think you can get on your phone or your computer, whatever, you've got it in the palm of your hand. You guys are all on Instagram. Yeah, you young people on Instagram. I understand Facebook is an old person's thing now, so I have a Facebook, but so Instagram, what else? Snapchat. TikTok. Oh yes, I can't forget about TikTok. What's the other one?
Discord.
Discord, yes, maybe Discord. If you're a gamer, I think mostly. All of this is social media. You can just get on any of those apps. Within 20 minutes, you could probably have at least 100 followers, 100 people that are going to agree with you. Much more difficult to do back in 1805, for example, when you have this idea of, how much government do we want to have in our lives? How much protection do we want from government? And so because of the fact that the communication is faster, it can cause groups of people to faction in this ideology. So you do have then the dichotomy of, well, I want the government to stay out of my life in terms of privacy, but yet I want the government to be in everybody else's lives in terms of privacy for vaccinations.
Excuse me, ma'am. I had a question. Or I kind of want to just throw it out there. So when I was younger, I had an abortion myself. I feel like when Roe versus Wade does come back, or when it comes back, or if Camille Harris does bring it back, I remember when I was younger that we didn't have enough education in the inner cities. If you guys remember when you guys were younger too, we weren't really informed enough. We weren't really educated enough to know what we were actually doing. I believe if Roe versus Wade does come back, so that's why I kind of believe that if the government is going to control Roe versus Wade and not give it back to us until we're responsible, I believe if we're responsible, then we can have Roe versus Wade. But if we're not responsible, then it should be restricted, because we got to know what we're doing when we're, you know what I mean? And so when I was younger, I didn't know what I was doing. I had an abortion myself. I actually regret it, but I wasn't educated on what I was doing. So I believe sex protection, more condoms. I believe that commercials should show condoms. It should show that we need to let's be more disciplined in having sex. Also, I believe that we should be more educated on what we're doing, not only in the inner cities, but in the mid-class cities, higher class, all that. So, and whatever president is able to do that, we're not here to campaign or to vote for a president. We're here for the people. So what we want to do is we want to think to ourselves: are we responsible enough? Do we know what we're even doing? Are we educated enough? Is the community educating it? Is the government educating it? Thank you, guys.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think that speaks to your concern and others as well. That just kind of puts that into like, not just the general argument of, you know, where do we draw the line in terms of privacy and government, but also what the government should be doing in terms of this issue. So if like you're saying, if the government is going to back off, right, and allow abortions at the same time, they should also require education for, you know, preventing conception in the first place, as was mentioned previously. So this is very deep, this topic. And when you hear candidates, I presented both candidates' opinions and views. I'm not here to support either one or the other. That's up to you to decide how you want to vote and what you want to do. This is just one of the issues that is surrounding this current presidential debate. And there's a lot of other things, you know, immigration, which I'm not here to discuss. And you know, a lot of that. So it all goes into and back to individually and personally, how much government do we want in our lives? And it varies on the issue. And when we're talking about abortion and reproductive rights, it's not just about the young woman who, 18 to 24, that finds herself in a situation where, you know, she, maybe going to college or whatever. But typically that's what we think of, and that does happen. But I think that what's not being talked about, and what I wanted to bring up in this issue of abortion and privacy, is that it's more of families that are finding themselves where the mother's life is being threatened, or the child's life is being threatened, or families that desperately want to have a child and use IVF and in vitro fertilization in order to be able to have that child, and then where if the government decides, however the government decides, either state government, if it's left up to the states, then Alabama has already ruled recently that these frozen embryos are children and should be protected. And so it goes beyond just what we typically, when you hear the word abortion, you typically think of the young, single college age. It goes far beyond that. So that, and really the question, where do you want to draw that line?
Thank you so much, Professor Haines. Can we get a round of applause?